So yeah, this is going to be pretty informal. I have kind of a couple lists I want to go through, but this is a short time anyway, but I definitely want to leave like 10 minutes at least for your questions. So please be thinking of the questions you want to ask, even, if they're related to something that I didn't get to, or really like AMA, ask me anything. I'm good with that. I live a pretty public life and people often have questions and that's fine, but so be keeping track of your questions. Okay, so promises, perils, promises. So promises, my period of academic expertise is the 18th century, and everything was happening in the 18th century. It was saw the emergence of what we call, I wasn't planning to do this, but give me a microphone and I'll start talking about the 18th century. But it was the emergence of print culture. When the printing press had been there for a while, but it got more efficient, more people were able to read, and so a ton of things started being printed, and like wars started because of it, literally. And so now we live in this digital age, and we are again being overwhelmed with content, lots and lots of stuff. And wars are being started over the disinformation. It's so similar. That's a promise. That's where I was getting, because the gates are open. The old gatekeepers have gone by, or there are many ways around the old gatekeepers. And so in some ways, publishing is easier than ever. It's easier than ever in terms of the ability for someone to get published, and I'll talk about the perils of that in a minute, but also just technologically speaking. It's the digital media is even easier than the printing press was. So there is much more ease of access, ease of publishing and getting published. And along with that, because of the digital age and social media, it's easier to get access to publishers, to the gatekeepers that still exist. And I'll talk more about sort of how to do that and how that happens, but it's just easier. It's embarrassing, but true that I think most of my big contacts have been made through Facebook Messenger or Twitter DMs or something. That's just how the world works in many ways today. You might have a hard time getting me to answer an email, but I'll be on my Twitter DM. I shouldn't tell you that, but and quicker than a split second. And other people are that way too. There are better ways to do that, and I'll talk about that too. But just to give you the idea that publishing is easier, access to gatekeepers, meaning publishers, is easier. Finding your audience is easier. And I'll talk about that too more. But just simply, there's a great book that I highly recommend, really just as a Christian, not necessarily as a writer, but as a Christian, if you're interested in navigating the culture. It's called Strange Rights by Tara Isabella Burton. I just taught it in my PhD seminar a couple of weeks ago. And what's really interesting about that is how she talks about how there are so many really, really narrow communities, people who have a specific interest in purple sock wearers who are left-handed and born in Delaware. I'm just making that up. But people, if you can have a very, very narrow identity, and you can find other people out on the internet who share that interest. And so you can find your people. And that's, your people are going to be your audience. So it's also easier in that way to develop community. And again, this is true not just of writers, but of the people, purple sock wearers from Delaware or whatever. It's easier to find community in some ways online, even though that's, another debate about online versus in-person community. So the world, the doors are open, the promises are everywhere for getting out there, getting published, but there are perils for each of those. So, if you've heard the expression, you can be a big fish in a small pond, or a small fish in a big pond. That's a really old. Okay, all right. I'm old. Some of you still know it. Okay. What I just described to you as being a very tiny fish in a very large ocean with millions of tiny fish. So the peril is that, everybody wants to be a writer. Everybody can be a writer one way or another. There's tons and tons, there's so much content out there. that even, just simply getting published in whatever way that is, it's very, very easy for your writing to just be lost in that flood of other writing. So I have met many a disillusioned writer who really thought the big hurdle as a writer was getting published. Now, as I said, there's self-publishing, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But even beyond that, there are just so many books out there, so many publishers, so many writers getting published. And one of the, I don't think it's a secret, but one of the facts of the publishing industry is that they basically use the spaghetti method, right? The spaghetti method is just like boil a pot of spaghetti, and I don't know if this metaphor is going to work right, but that's all right. And whatever sticks. And the facts of the industry are, and maybe this has changed a little bit, but it's essentially the same, that 10% of a publisher's books make a profit for the company, and that 10% pays for the 90% that lose money. So most writers who get published are going to lose money for their publisher. And they know that. I mean, this is just how the whole thing is structured, and it has a lot of weaknesses in it. But that means that those, and they don't always know which are the 10% that are going to really take off. And so that means that if your book doesn't do phenomenally well out of the gate on release day, then the publisher is just going to ignore that for the most part and go on to the one that's doing great. And so that means the resources in promoting and marketing your book are not very much, and that's left up to the writer. That's another of the perils, that writers do have to promote their works, and I'll get to that when I talk about platform. Another P, so many P's here. And so that's just sort of the reality in a nutshell of what this big world that is open to many more people than ever before, but being open still means you have to find your way. Your work has to find your way. And even though it's easy to access publishers and editors and so forth, just in the same way that it's easier to get access to everyone in the digital age, they are still human, and they are they're getting, instead of getting 10 emails a week, they're getting 100 or 200 emails a week. And so there still has to be something that makes you stand out. And what makes anyone stand out has never really changed in all of human existence. It is usually the human connection. Whether it's, someone who knows you and recommends you, or you actually met the editor because you took your physical body and put it in a physical car or plane and spent the physical money to go to a conference and show up, demonstrating that you're actually serious, that you're not just like sitting, in the basement behind your keyboard trying to find a publisher. You're out there, you're meeting people. And so when you meet if you go to a conference, and I'll just name like the best conference I know of, not that I'm like an expert on writing conferences, but in pre-COVID, we're talking the Festival of Faith and Writing at Calvin University, or college, whatever it is now, just hosts one of the biggest within the somewhat Christian faith community, and publishers and editors go, and they have little parties where you can go in and get hors d'oeuvres and talk to the editors and show up, and it's fun. They will talk to you. They're there, and but it takes you the money to get there, and the time and the but that shows commitment. And then there are much smaller. Here at Southeastern, free to you, was, Chris Thompson, who is an expert in the publishing industry, who is here to give a little workshop, and he knows his stuff, and he has connections, and you showed up. So if you didn't talk to him before, go find him, but don't tell him I sent you. Is he here? Okay, no. So there is still the human element that really matters. And just I'll tell a little tale as an example. I've been in the publishing world for a decade now, and paid my dues and done a lot, and you have to do a lot too, not just you have to help other people. They don't just help you. And I serve now on the editorial committee for a series with a Christian publisher, doing really good work. And a younger colleague of mine contacted me with a book idea that he thought would be perfect for the series, and I said, "Do you want to write the book?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, I will email the editor of the series and see if he's interested." And I emailed the editor of the series. He says, "That sounds like a great idea. Connect me with him." And I connected him, and now he's got, now I'm the person who's connecting someone who is relatively younger and unpublished, because I'm on this committee. But that's a representation of years and years of friendship and work, but that's a natural outgrowth of, well, being human. So I guess maybe that's going to be my big tip is be human. That is still how things work. This colleague, he has to submit the proposal, and it has to go through all of those regular procedures. So there's no guarantee at this point. But the fact is that he got in the door because of his longstanding relationship and friendship with me, and I got on that committee because of my work, in writing and publishing and in this area. So that's how a lot of things do happen. And then I want to talk a little bit about the perils of audience, and I will talk specifically about platform, because I think that's one of the promises and perils. But in general, I want to say, and I think they say this about church too, about church growth, so I might be plagiarizing this a little bit. But there's some saying out there like, what brings them in is what will keep them in. Is that right? Did they say that? Yeah. Well, it's the same thing for building an audience. Now, I'm not going to name any names, but there are folks out there on Twitter who are building audiences by giving the hottest hot takes that are terrible of all. I don't think I'm one of them. I might now and then, but give a bad take. But there are people who are building huge platforms and followings by doing that. And so that audience that they gain will be hungry for that. And so once you whet an appetite for something and you get an audience, that audience wants that. And so you're going to have to feed them what you promised. And so you have to be very, very careful. And so when you're building an audience, be sure you're building an audience of like-minded people who are interested in the same things that you're interested in. That might take time, but that's what you want to do. Because you can't just bait and switch. That won't work. An audience won't carry over into something else that you are more interested in. And then just sort of a smaller example of that is related to the kinds of things you write. You do, as you're a developing writer and trying to build a platform and a CV and experience and make the connections and do all the things I just told you to do, you will write things, at some point you'll be asked to write things by editors that you have to decide, okay, well, this isn't really, my passion, but it's an opportunity, and is it a good opportunity? And then you decide, because you're building experience and so forth. I mean, there are a number of articles I've been asked to write that really I wasn't that interested in. There wasn't, and I did it, and I learned a lot, and I grew. But there was one blog post I wrote a number of years ago, and I wanted to write it. It was my idea, but it was about having a gun. Right? And so I wrote this one blog post about why my husband bought me a handgun, and it's true, it's a true story. But suddenly I found out later that I was put on a list for media experts of an evangelical woman who carries a gun. And so I started getting calls like, will you write about this? And I have a position and I believe in that position that I put, but I don't want to be the evangelical gun lady. This is not what I want to write about. And so you have to just kind of, you have to realize that something that you write could carve out a niche that you don't necessarily want. And so that's a lesson I learned kind of the hard way. I ended up on PBS talking about guns because a friend wanted me, and it's fine, I'm learning. But and this is part of the natural process. You do have to kind of get your feet wet and try things, and then the goal is, and I'm almost there, I think, where I can just like write about only the things I want to write about when I want to write about them. And but with that said, that's taken many years of work. So building audience, part of that is platform. Timing myself here because I want to keep track of your questions because I could just keep going. You will hear, if you do any, your first Google search about how to get published, you'll find you have to have a platform, right? And there's a lot of confusion over what a platform is or what a good, strong platform is. And publishers haven't been clear about that because they don't really care. And that's fine. That's not their job to care. But I care, and I'm here to tell you that building a platform is not about the number of followers you get on Twitter or Instagram. Now, will publishers look at that? Oh, sure, they'll look at that. That matters to them. But it doesn't matter. The number of followers you have on whatever social media outlet is not itself a platform. It's only a platform if those audience members or followers or whatever you call them have come to you to get what you have to deliver through a publisher. So if they're just following you because you've, again, done a bunch of hot takes, but you want to write about theology, so you've given a bunch, I'm not thinking of anyone here. And you've given a bunch of dumb hot takes on theological topics and attracted a bunch of Russian bots and, nameless people on Twitter who don't read books, then they're not going to buy the good book that you write on theology. I'm kind of exaggerating here, but you get the idea, right? So building up, having a number of followers is something publishers look at, but the number of followers you have is really only good if it's because you have delivered good work already. The work is the platform. The work that you have done and are doing, and that means sometimes a degree, it means expertise, it means authority, and it means that you have, through those things or other things, life experience is a platform. But because of those things, people actually care what you have to say. They want to know what you have to say. So that's what a publisher wants. A publisher, just because you have written something, writing something as hard as it is, as I mentioned earlier today, it's really hard for most of us, including me. That's kind of the easiest part. It's actually very hard to find a publisher. At least, I came into it a little before the digital explosion, so maybe it was a little harder for me. But I tell people when especially students, undergraduate students, when they come to me and they say, I want to be like you. I want to do what you do. And I say, well, if you want to be like me, you won't publish your first book until you're 47. And then they're like, oh. And you'll get a PhD first. And then you'll teach for like 13 years before you ever write it. And that's like, people are not looking at, all of the work that it took to get there. Now, a lot of people are publishing, they're faster than me. I'm slow. I'm a slow worker. And so some people will, succeed a lot faster than I did. But I would say that when I came into writing and publishing books and blogs, I was coming alongside a lot of much younger women who are out there doing similar things in the, evangelical world. I'm evangelical, I can say it that way. But, the whole celebrity platform building thing. And almost all of them have kind of fallen to the wayside, disillusioned, like their first book was their big one. They got the big name as to write the foreword or to endorse it, and they're disillusioned. They thought this was going to change their lives. They thought their book was going to be the next bestseller. They thought they were going to be the next Anne Voskamp. But those are the great exceptions. And so when all that falls away, what do you have to fall back on? If hopefully if your platform is your work, then that's what you fall back on. Your work, the thing that you've done first, that brought you the things that you wanted to say and write. Very few people are going to end up being, Stephen King, or Anne Voskamp, and that's and that's not a bad thing. That's not a good thing. I mean, maybe it's okay, but for most of us, we're investing in something more and doing something more, and the writing comes from that. And that's why I say, I'm not a fan of self-publishing. I am an elite like that, but I'll tell you why. I mean, because in academia, we have something called peer review, and that's, you have your peers review something before it gets published. And even in popular publishing or trade publishing or Christian publishing, it's kind of like a peer review. Like, I literally do not want to publish something that some even small community of people who publish don't believe in enough to publish me. If that's not the case, I just want to keep going. And I did. It took me a long time to find my first publisher, and it was a very small publisher. It's still a very small publisher, and that's probably will always be my favorite book. And it was just a wonderful experience because I waited. I just told the Lord, I'm not going. If you want this to be I'm not going to self-publish, because I want to know that the world believes in me, even if it's only a small corner of the world. And I don't want to do, if you went to Ross's talk, he talked about vainglory and intellectual pride. And there are other different reasons to self-publish. So I'm putting those aside. But most people do that because they either don't know or don't want to do the work that it takes to build a community that is going to be mutually supportive and show that they believe in you and be there for you, even if it's a small little independent publisher.